The studio lights blazed with their usual warmth that evening in London. The iconic red couch sat waiting, surrounded by the familiar glow of lamps and the scattered wine glasses that had witnessed countless memorable moments in television history. The Graham Norton Show had become a sanctuary for celebrities, a place where the world's biggest stars could shed their carefully constructed personas, share a laugh, and maybe reveal a little too much over a glass of wine. It was supposed to be easy. It was always easy, until she walked through the door. The audience erupted in applause as Meghan Markle made her entrance. She moved with the practiced grace of someone who had spent years perfecting her public image, her designer outfit immaculate, her hair perfectly in place, her smile professional and measured. She waved to the crowd with the polished elegance of royalty in waiting. But something was different tonight. The air itself seemed to hum with an unspoken tension, the kind you feel just before a storm breaks, the kind that makes the hairs on the back of your neck stand up. Graham rose from his chair, extending his hand with that signature Irish warmth that had made him one of the most beloved hosts in television history. His eyes crinkled with genuine delight, as they always did when welcoming a new guest to his cherished show. "Meghan, welcome, welcome," he beamed, his voice lilting with that unmistakable Cork accent that had charmed millions. "It's so lovely to have you here." She settled into the chair with deliberate poise, crossing her legs with what some might call elegance and others might call calculation. "Thank you for having me," she replied, her voice measured and controlled. The voice of someone who had been trained to reveal nothing while appearing to reveal everything. But the cameras picked up something else. A flicker in her eyes, a tension in her shoulders. The subtle signs that this would not be a typical Graham Norton interview. The conversation began as it always did, light, playful, the kind of banter that made the show famous. Graham leaned back in his chair with casual ease, that disarming smile never leaving his face. "So, you've been keeping quite busy lately," he began, his tone inviting, warm, the verbal equivalent of an open door. "Tell us what you've been up to." Meghan shifted in her seat, and the first crack in the evening's facade appeared. "Well, Graham, I've been working on several important projects. Projects that actually matter. Things that make a real difference in the world." Her voice carried an edge now, a subtle but unmistakable implication that lingered in the air like smoke. The implication that she was above this, above him, above all of it. Graham, sensing the shift, kept his smile steady. He'd been hosting this show for decades. He'd navigated more difficult conversations than most people could imagine. He knew when a guest was testing boundaries, and he knew how to gently steer them back. "That's wonderful," he said smoothly. "We'd love to hear about them." She launched into a detailed description of her various initiatives, her words flowing with the practiced cadence of someone who had delivered this speech many times before. But with each sentence, an underlying message emerged, a subtle but persistent assertion of her own importance. The audience, usually so responsive, began to grow quiet. The laughter that usually punctuated these interviews was notably absent. Something was wrong, and everyone in that studio could feel it. "You see," she continued, "not everyone understands what it means to use your platform for good. Some people are just content to sit around and entertain." The words hung in the air like a challenge, and the studio seemed to contract around them. Cameramen exchanged glances. The producer's face appeared in the control room window, his expression tense. Graham's eyebrows lifted slightly. His legendary patience, tested by years of difficult guests and unexpected moments, was being called upon. "Well," he offered, his voice still carrying that signature warmth but with a new edge of caution, "I like to think entertainment has value, too. Bringing people joy, giving them a break from their troubles. That's not nothing." "I suppose," she replied, her tone dripping with condescension, the words landing like small, deliberate strikes. "But surely you'd admit that some things are more important than others. I mean, look at what I could be doing right now instead of sitting here talking about trivial matters." The audience's discomfort was palpable now. People shifted in their seats. The usual ease of the Graham Norton set had evaporated. replaced by something far more uncomfortable. This wasn't playful banter. This wasn't celebrity gossip over wine. This felt pointed, almost confrontational, as if she had come not to be interviewed, but to lecture. Graham's smile tightened almost imperceptibly, the only visible sign that she had struck a nerve. "Well," he said, his voice carrying the faintest hint of steel beneath its warmth. "Our millions of viewers don't seem to think what we do is trivial. They tune in every week because they enjoy it. They value it." "Of course they do," Meghan said with a dismissive wave of her hand, the gesture saying what her words couldn't. "People enjoy lots of things that don't really matter in the grand scheme of things. That's just human nature." The audience shifted uncomfortably. This wasn't the Graham Norton they knew. This wasn't the show they'd come to see. In the front row, a woman leaned over to her companion and whispered something, her eyes wide with disbelief. Graham, ever the professional, tried once more to steer the conversation to lighter waters. He'd weathered storms before, and he knew the only way through them was to keep moving forward. "Let's talk about your time in the spotlight," he suggested, his tone carefully neutral. "You've certainly experienced quite a journey. How do you handle all the attention?" Meghan's expression hardened, the mask slipping for just a moment to reveal something sharper beneath. "The attention is relentless, Graham. You couldn't possibly understand what it's like to be scrutinized the way I am. Every single move I make is analyzed, criticized. It's exhausting." "I imagine it's very difficult," Graham said sympathetically, genuinely meaning the words. He'd seen how fame could consume people, how the constant scrutiny could wear down even the strongest spirits. "Though I think many people in the public eye face similar challenges." "Not like this," she shot back, her voice rising slightly. The smooth veneer was cracking, and what emerged was something far more raw, far more confrontational. "My situation is unique. The level of persecution I face is unlike anything anyone else has experienced." The audience had gone completely silent now. You could have heard a pin drop in that cavernous studio. Even Graham's practiced smile was beginning to show cracks at the edges. He glanced briefly at his producer off camera, then back at his guest. In that glance was a question. How far is this going to go? "Well," he said carefully, choosing his words with the precision of a diplomat, "I think we can all agree that being in the public eye comes with challenges. But you've also had incredible opportunities, haven't you? The platform you mentioned using for good." Her eyes narrowed, and the room seemed to grow colder. "Are you suggesting I should be grateful for the harassment?" "Not at all," Graham said quickly, maintaining his composure with visible effort. "I'm simply saying that with the challenges also come opportunities. That's true for most people in your position." "Most people aren't in my position," she said sharply, the words like a blade. "That's exactly my point." Graham took a breath. The atmosphere in the studio had become suffocating, the air thick with tension that seemed to press down on everyone present. Even the cameramen, usually focused on their technical duties, were exchanging worried glances. This was not how interviews were supposed to go. This was not the Graham Norton experience. He decided to try once more to lighten things up, to salvage something from this unfolding disaster. "Listen, Meghan," he said, leaning forward slightly, his voice carrying the warmth that had disarmed hundreds of guests before her. "I understand you're passionate about your work. That's admirable. But this show has its own value, too. We've raised millions for charity over the years. We've given people a chance to laugh during difficult times. That's not nothing." Meghan's expression didn't soften. "Charity is wonderful, Graham. But real change requires more than just writing checks and making people laugh for an hour." Graham tried again, his smile becoming slightly strained at the edges. "Tell you what, why don't we talk about something fun? I heard you've been learning to cook some traditional dishes. Any disasters in the kitchen we should know about?" She looked at him as if he had just asked the most offensive question imaginable. Her eyes widened, and her mouth tightened into a thin line of barely suppressed fury. "I don't think my cooking skills are really relevant to the important work I'm doing, Graham. Right? Of course," His smile was becoming more brittle now, the strain showing despite his best efforts to hide it. I just thought, a bit of lighthearted chat. That's rather what we do here. Maybe that's the problem, she said, and there was a pointed edge to her voice now, the tip of the knife finally showing itself. Maybe we should be having more serious conversations instead of these shallow exchanges about cooking and celebrities. The audience gasped, a collective intake of breath that seemed to suck all the air out of the room. You could have heard a pin drop in that studio. You could have heard a heartbeat. Graham's face remained calm, but his eyes had gone steely. The eyes of a man who had just been insulted in front of his audience, his crew, his millions of viewers. This was his show, his format, his life's work, and she had just insulted everything he'd built over his decades-long career. I see, Graham said quietly, the calm before the storm. His Irish accent, usually softened for television, seemed more pronounced now, more grounding. Well, Meghan, this show has been bringing joy to millions of people for many years. We pride ourselves on creating a space where people can relax, laugh, and yes, have some lighthearted fun. If that's not something you value, perhaps we're not the right fit. Meghan's expression shifted. For a moment, she seemed to realize she'd gone too far. A flicker of something, doubt, fear, crossed her face. But instead of backing down, instead of offering the olive branch that could have salvaged the situation, she doubled down. She chose escalation over grace. You're right, she said coolly, the words dripping with contempt. Maybe we're not. Maybe I expected too much, thinking we could have an intelligent conversation here. The audience let out a collective sound of shock. Several people in the front row had their hands over their mouths. A man in the back shook his head in disbelief. This wasn't just tension anymore. This was a full-scale confrontation playing out on live television. Graham sat perfectly still for a moment, and then something remarkable happened. He smiled, but it wasn't his usual warm, welcoming smile, the one that had made him famous. This was different. This was the smile of a man who had had quite enough. A man who had been pushed too far. I know exactly who you are, he said quietly. You're someone who forgot that being kind matters more than being important. You're someone who forgot that every person deserves respect, whether they're a talk show host or a member of the audience or anyone else. And you're someone who right now needs to leave my show. The audience erupted in applause again, this time even louder. People were on their feet, clapping and cheering for Graham. Not just for standing up to rudeness, but for doing it with such grace and dignity. They had witnessed something remarkable. A man defending his values without losing his composure, without descending to the level of his aggressor. Meghan looked around at the sea of faces, all of them clearly on the host's side, and for the first time that evening, she seemed to be at a loss for words. The mask had fallen away completely, revealing something raw and exposed beneath. She grabbed her purse from beside the chair, her movements sharp and angry, her fingers trembling slightly. This is unbelievable, she muttered, though the microphone still picked it up, broadcasting her words to everyone in the studio and millions watching at home. I came here as a courtesy, and this is how I'm treated. You should be thanking me for appearing on your little show. Little show? Someone in the audience called out, their voice dripping with sarcasm. Others murmured in agreement, a ripple of disapproval spreading through the crowd. They were done being polite. They'd watched this woman insult something they loved, someone they loved, and they'd had enough. Graham's expression didn't change, but his voice carried a note of genuine sadness now. A courtesy, he repeated slowly, as if tasting the word for the first time. Meghan, people come on this show because they want to connect with the audience, because they want to have a good time, because they enjoy being here, not as a courtesy, as a privilege. Her face was red now, a mix of anger and what might have been embarrassment. You'll regret this, she said, pointing a finger at him. You have no idea what you've just done. Graham just smiled, that warm, genuine smile that millions loved, that had made him famous around the world. I don't think I will, he said softly. I think I'll sleep quite well tonight, actually. knowing I stood up for the values this show represents. She turned on her heel and began walking toward the exit, her heels clicking against the floor in a sharp, angry rhythm. The audience continued clapping as she left, but it wasn't supportive applause. It was applause for Graham, for his courage, for his dignity, for standing up to someone who had clearly crossed a line. As Meghan reached the edge of the set, she paused and turned back, her face contorted with barely suppressed fury. "You know what, Graham?" she called out, her voice dripping with disdain. "Your little show here, your jokes and your wine and your silly games. They're all just distractions. Meaningless distractions from the real issues in the world. While you're sitting here making people giggle, there are serious problems that need addressing." The audience booed. Actually booed. It was unprecedented. A sound of pure disapproval that echoed through the studio. Graham held up his hand, asking them to stop. He wanted to respond to this himself. He walked closer to where she stood, his footsteps measured and deliberate. The cameras followed him, capturing every moment. When he spoke, his voice was loud enough for everyone to hear, but it wasn't angry. It was sad. Genuinely sad, as if he was mourning something. "You know what I think is meaningless?" he asked, his words carrying a weight that silenced the room. "Coming onto someone's show and insulting them. Looking down on people who are just trying to bring a little happiness into the world. Acting like you're the only person who's ever faced hardship or criticism. That's what's meaningless. Because at the end of the day, Meghan, kindness matters. Joy matters. Making people laugh and feel good matters. And if you can't see that, then I genuinely feel sorry for you." The studio fell silent. Even the crew, usually busy with their tasks, had stopped to watch. Meghan opened her mouth as if to respond, but nothing came out. She looked at Graham, then at the audience, then back at Graham. The cameras captured every second of her hesitation, every flicker of emotion that crossed her face. "Goodbye, Meghan," Graham said quietly. She turned without another word and walked off the set. The sound of her heels clicking against the floor echoed through the silent studio until she disappeared through the exit. The door closed behind her with a soft thud that seemed to echo through the room. For a moment, nobody moved. Graham stood there looking at the empty doorway, his shoulders rising and falling with a deep breath. Then he turned back to the audience and the cameras, and slowly, almost imperceptibly, that famous smile returned to his face. But this time it was different. There was a vulnerability to it, a rawness that betrayed how much the confrontation had affected him. "Well," he said, and there was a slight shake in his voice that he couldn't quite control. "That was unexpected." The audience laughed. A release of all the tension that had been building, a collective exhale of relief. Then they stood up and gave Graham the longest, loudest standing ovation he'd ever received. People were cheering. Some were even crying, moved by his quiet dignity in the face of such rudeness. Graham waited for the applause to die down, his eyes glistening slightly, his throat working as he composed himself. "Thank you," he said softly, the words barely audible over the fading cheers. "Thank you so much. I've been doing this job for a long time, and I've always believed that this show is about bringing people together, about creating a space where everyone feels welcome, where we can all have a laugh and forget our troubles for a while." He paused, collecting himself, his hand brushing briefly across his eyes. "And I will never, ever apologize for that, because making people happy, giving them something to smile about, that's not meaningless. That's everything." More applause. Graham held up his hand, asking for quiet. "Now," he said, his smile growing wider, "we still have a show to do. And I promise you, the rest of the evening will be much more fun." The audience cheered again. One woman in the front row stood up and shouted, "We love you, Graham." Others joined in, echoing the sentiment. Graham looked genuinely touched, his eyes bright with unshed tears. "I love you too," he said, placing his hand over his heart. "All of you. That's why we do this. That's why this show exists." He walked back to his chair and sat down, straightening his jacket, taking a sip of water to compose himself. The cameras remained on him as he settled back into his seat. Then he looked directly at the camera, that twinkle returning to his eye, the twinkle that had made him beloved around the world. "Right then," he said, his tone shifting back to that familiar warmth. "Where were we? Oh yes, we have some absolutely brilliant guests coming up. People who understand what this show is about. People who are here to have fun and make you laugh." The band started playing. The audience clapped along. And just like that, the show continued. But everyone in that studio knew they'd witnessed something remarkable. They'd seen a man stand up for his values, defend his show and his audience, and do it all with grace and dignity. They'd seen someone who had been pushed to his limit and responded with strength instead of anger, with conviction instead of cruelty. Backstage, crew members were buzzing about what had just happened. The producer was on the phone, no doubt dealing with the fallout that would inevitably come. Social media was already exploding. Rumors spreading like wildfire, clips being shared, opinions forming. But Graham remained focused on his job, on bringing joy to the people watching. The confrontation had lasted less than 20 minutes from start to finish, but it had felt like hours. The shift from a normal interview to a full-blown clash had been gradual at first, then sudden. Each dismissive comment from Meghan had built on the last, each condescending remark adding another layer of tension until finally, with that one question, "Do you have any idea who I am?" the whole thing had exploded, and Graham had handled it perfectly. He hadn't lost his temper. He hadn't shouted or become aggressive. He'd simply stood his ground, defended his show and his values. And when it became clear that Meghan wasn't going to change her attitude, he'd asked her to leave. It was simple, direct, and absolutely justified. As the evening went on and the other guests came out, the energy in the studio was electric. Everyone there felt like they'd been part of something important. They'd seen someone stand up against entitlement, against rudeness, against the idea that fame gives you the right to look down on others. They'd witnessed a masterclass in dignity. Between segments, during the commercial breaks, audience members would lean over to each other and whisper about what they'd witnessed. "Can you believe that happened? I can't wait to tell everyone about this." Graham was absolutely right. The consensus was unanimous. He'd done the right thing. The rest of the show went smoothly. The other guests were delightful, funny, respectful, and grateful to be there. They played the games, told their stories, and helped Graham create the kind of warm, entertaining atmosphere that had made the show so beloved. It was a stark contrast to what had come before, and it only reinforced how out of line Meghan's behavior had been. As the show drew to a close and Graham said his goodbyes to the audience, there was a sense that something had changed. This wasn't just another episode. This was the night Graham Norton showed the world that kindness and respect matter, that entertainment has value, and that no amount of fame or status gives anyone the right to be rude. The cameras stopped rolling. The audience filed out, still buzzing with excitement about what they'd seen. Graham sat in his chair for a moment, alone on the set, and let out a long breath. It had been one of the most difficult interviews of his career, but he'd handled it the only way he knew how, with honesty, with integrity, and with unwavering respect for his audience. Then one of the producers approached him cautiously. "That was incredible, Graham. Are you okay?" Graham smiled, a real smile this time, not the professional one he wore for the cameras. "I'm fine. Really. I meant every word I said. This show has always been about bringing people together, about creating joy, and I won't let anyone turn it into something else." The producer nodded firmly. "You did the right thing. Everyone here knows it. The audience knows it, and I think the world is going to know it, too." Graham nodded, standing up and stretching his tired muscles. "Well, it's done now. Let's just focus on making great television. That's what we're here for." And that was it. The moment had passed, but its impact would resonate far beyond that studio, far beyond that evening. Because sometimes the most important thing you can do is stand up for what you believe in, even when it's uncomfortable, even when it means making a difficult decision, even when it means asking someone to leave. Graham Norton had spent decades building a show based on warmth, humor, and respect. And on this night, He'd proven that those values weren't just words. They were principles he was willing to defend, no matter who was sitting in the guest chair. That 33-second exchange, from, "Do you have any idea who I am?" to, "I know exactly who you are," had defined everything. It had shown the difference between entitlement and humility, between looking down on people and lifting them up. It had reminded everyone watching that fame without grace is just noise, and that true power comes not from status, but from how you treat others. As Graham left the studio that night, he knew he'd done something important. Not just for himself, not just for his show, but for everyone who'd ever been made to feel small by someone who thought they were better. He'd shown that kindness isn't weakness, that standing up for respect matters, and that sometimes the bravest thing you can do is simply say, "Not on my watch." In the days that followed, the clip went viral. Social media exploded with commentary, with fans and critics alike weighing in on what had happened. Some defended Meghan, claiming she was simply being honest. But the overwhelming majority praised Graham for his handling of the situation, for his dignity, his grace, and his unwavering commitment to kindness. The incident became a cultural touchstone, a reminder that no amount of fame gives anyone the right to look down on others. It sparked conversations about entitlement, about the nature of fame, and about what it truly means to use a platform for good. And through it all, Graham Norton remained exactly who he'd always been. A man who believed that joy matters, that laughter matters, and that everyone deserves to be treated with respect. He'd proven that you can stand up for yourself without losing your soul, that you can be firm without being cruel, and that sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is simply refuse to accept less than you deserve. The show went on. It always did. But that night would never be forgotten. Not by the audience, not by the crew, and certainly not by the woman who had learned that even the most famous person in the world isn't above basic decency. Because in the end, the real question isn't, "Do you have any idea who I am?" The real question is, "Do you have any idea who they are?" And Graham Norton had the answer.